In this video, we're going to talk about the different types of cases that are heard in the court system, as well as the different levels of the federal court system. So let's start with the two types of cases. You're going to have criminal cases and civil cases. So criminal law is going to cover actions that can cause harm to the community. So when you are breaking the law, so committing an act like murder or assault, that would be considered a criminal case. So in criminal cases, the state or federal government is going to act as a prosecutor, okay? And they're going to try to prove the guilt of the defendant, okay? So the defendant is the person that has been accused of committing this crime. So these crimes are going to be punishable by serious penalties, including incarceration, so jail time, or possibly capital punishment. So in some states, the death penalty. Okay, but punishments can vary by the state. So, for example, the death penalty is legal in some states and illegal in others. Most criminal cases are going to be resolved without going to trial through a plea bargain, okay, where the defendant is going to agree to plead guilty to a crime, often for a lesser charge and a lesser sentence. So, some acts as well are going to be legal in some states and not in others. So, in some cases, marijuana use is legal, okay, medical marijuana. In other states, the use of marijuana is considered illegal. So some acts are considered criminal in some states and aren't in others. Punishments can vary from state to state. So those are criminal cases. Civil cases, on the other hand, are going to cover cases involving private rights and relationships between individuals and groups. So this is going to be non-criminal cases. They're generally going to relate, again, to private rights, so things like personal injury cases or property damage cases or contract violations, okay? That's what civil law is going to cover. And in civil cases, the plaintiff is going to be the party that argues they've been wronged, and then the defendant is accused of violating a person's rights or breaking an agreement. So the consequences for a defendant are going to be limited to monetary payments or requirements for action. So we're not looking at jail time or the death penalty in terms of civil cases. Most civil cases are going to be settled by an agreement between parties without going to trial. All right, so moving on, let's talk about the different types of courts within our court system. So it's important to note that there is a state court system and a federal court system. So each state is going to have its own court system, and it's going to be set up much like the federal court system. So you can see that there is a state Supreme Court, and then you're going to have those lower level courts, just like you would in the federal court system. So state courts are going to handle most of the cases in the United States. So most criminal and civil cases are going to go through the state court system. Systems are going to include appellate and state Supreme Courts. Okay, so they're going to have the Court of Appeals, and then in each state they'll have the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in that state. So some of those traits of the state court system is that they handle criminal and civil cases. Okay, so they handle both. Trial courts are going to handle cases under state laws. Okay, so if you are charged with violating a state law, okay, state law, it is going to be handled in state court. And then there's those smaller courts within the state system that handle things like traffic violations and other minor cases like that. Okay, cases that are concerning the Constitution, okay, within the federal court system might proceed to the federal judiciary, where a federal court will decide that case instead of the state court. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the federal court system. So again, states have their own court system, and then we have the federal court system. So this is what we're talking about right now. So the United States government, its court system. So the lowest level of the court system, and we'll go back and I will show you this pyramid again, okay? So you can think of the court system like a pyramid. So the lowest level is the district courts. Then at the middle, you have your Court of Appeals or your appellate courts. And then you have the Supreme Court at the very top. Okay, going back, so the district court's lowest level, They are going to have that original jurisdiction, okay, where they hear cases first and they're the finder of facts. They get to hear the case, decide the outcome in cases that start at the federal level. So they are going to handle most of the work. The judge is going to hear each case, okay? And there are 94 district courts or geographic areas, okay, from which each district hears the court cases, okay? So there's 94 district courts. There are 2 district courts in the state of Kentucky. Each state has at least one, but district court boundaries do not cross state lines. Okay, and then that next level, so that middle level, are going to be those federal appellate courts. You might hear them called circuit courts or courts of appeals. It all means the same thing. And this is where they are going to review and hear appeals from district courts. Okay, so district courts, that lowest level, have original jurisdiction. Appellate courts have that appellate jurisdiction. And let's talk about what appeals mean, okay? Because they're not hearing new cases or witness testimony. Appeals is when a party that is lost at trial, they can apply for a review by a higher court. So if a party loses in district court, they can appeal, okay, to that circuit court. So appeals have to be based on a perceived error of law made by the judge at trial. Okay, so simply disagreeing with the verdict is not going to be a sufficient request. Okay, they have to find a perceived error in the law. Okay, so in appellate courts, they're reviewing from appeals from those district courts. So there are 13 appellate courts in the United States. Kentucky is in the 6th Circuit, okay, and that is located in Cincinnati. Okay, so district courts, lowest level, original jurisdiction. Appellate courts, circuit courts, court of appeals, whatever you want to refer to them as, have that appellate jurisdiction where they can hear appeals from district courts. And then finally, we have the Supreme Court. Okay, and the Supreme Court, as we have said, is the highest court in the nation. Okay, so Supreme Court of the land, much like the Supremacy Clause and the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The role of the Supreme Court is to resolve differences between states and lower courts, okay? So they can take appeals from the state court system, or they can take appeals from those lower courts in the federal court system. The Supreme Court has 9 justices, okay? We've said that they've had 9 justices for many, many years now, okay? So there's 1 Chief Justice and then 8 Associate Justices. And the Supreme Court meets 9 months out of the year starting in October. And that's when they will go through that process of reading different requests for appeals and deciding which cases that they are going to take. So let's talk a little bit about the original jurisdiction for the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court has both original jurisdiction, where they can hear cases first, as well as that appellate jurisdiction. So cases for original jurisdiction in the Supreme Court are those affecting ambassadors and other public ministers, or those in which a state shall be a party. Okay, so original jurisdiction in case involving federal officials, international issues, and then when a state is a party. In other federal cases or state cases involving a federal issue, so if it's a state case involving the Constitution, the Supreme Court is going to have that appellate jurisdiction, okay? So where they can review the decisions that lower courts have made, possibly overturn those decisions if they find an error. All right, and that's where we are going to stop with this video.